Classification Society on what some of the technologies in the future are going to be. And in some ways, most importantly, we've also gathered evidence from people who in their recent past were officer cadets, who are now officers, and some really interesting evidence. And we used all of that evidence that we heard to pull together the report and the recommendations that hopefully, if you're listening to this webinar, you've seen. We'll talk about our thoughts on the report over the next 3/4 of an hour or so. And then Graham Baldwin, who's the chair of the Maritime Skills Commission as a whole, will join us to chair some questions from the floor. So I'm going to be asking each of my fellow working group members maybe to contribute to the discussion over the next 45 minutes before Graham joins us. I thought it might be worth, just before I ask my fellow panelists to chip into this, just to describe what we thought that cadet training should achieve. So if we were really successful in the recommendations that we came up with and the sector implemented them, what would that success deliver? And we felt it should, the training experience and welfare should create really capable, highly capable officers, that the sea experience should be a learning highlight and not a rite of passage. And I'm sure that's a topic that we're going to come back to. And within all of that, we felt quite strongly that women must be treated during that sea experience in a way that's compatible with today's UK standards. We felt that we'd know that training experience and welfare was working if the dropout rate of cadets was low. When we thought about training content, teaching and tools, we felt they really must meet the current and evolving needs of employers. So this means looking into the future, and that's why we talked to some of the employers that we did. We felt that delivery of that training should respect the capability of the students, making best use of their individual capacity to learn. So there's something there about not just a one-size-fits-all approach to training. And we also felt that teaching delivery should balance technical expertise of the teachers with educational insights that those teachers and tutors have. We wondered about qualifications and the career journey and felt that it should obviously reflect course content, but it needed to be pitched at the right level to attract appropriate talent into the sector. And that the qualifications that people gained during their officer training should continue to have currency as their careers developed. We thought about incentives and mechanisms in the sector, funding, for example, and we felt that those should support forward-thinking evolution and to anticipate what we saw as accelerating change in the shipping sector in the future. And we were really aware that shipping has a very proud tradition and culture, and we felt that we should be positive about that and that should be respected. We also felt that that couldn't be a barrier to change that was necessary. So those are the sort of parameters we worked within. I'm going to cut straight to the sort of shape of the conclusions really, and the recommendations, and then I think as my fellow panelists talk, we can fill in some of the details behind them. So the broad conclusions were, first of all, we're not attracting enough currently of the very best students, and we could be attracting more people into the sector. Second one, we heard very clearly from some of our employers that we weren't fully meeting their demands in terms of the skills that young officers were able to bring to bear. And that particularly came out in terms of leadership skills and technical agility in what's a very changing environment at the moment. We heard really clearly from students that we're not meeting their needs fully and their aspirations, and really some quite critical feedback from students on the quality of teaching, the quality of mentoring and support, and particularly on the quality of the experience that they got at sea, which was, I'd say variable is probably quite quite a mild and polite term to use for it. We heard from employers, students, and actually from colleges that many courses were out of date and the courses were years out of date and currently adapting too slowly for the future. We heard that financial governance and advisory structures surrounding the sector just don't encourage forward-thinking evolution. And I think that it's very striking. There are very few people I speak to in the sector who are satisfied with the rate at which cadet training has evolved over the years. And I think one of the big challenges from this report is going to be taking the implementations and actually making them stick, making them happen in the sector. We heard a lot of the STCW standard set by the IMO. It's a minimum standard. It's not a desirable standard. It's just the minimum floor level for young officers to achieve. And a consistent story that just wasn't enough. Just barely meeting STCW shouldn't be an aspiration for the UK. And in all of that, we saw that seafarer officer education in the UK needed reform. We felt if it could be reformed, then as change in the shipping sector happens, there would be potentially a fantastic opportunity for UK cadets in the international shipping arena. So the recommendations cover funding, full funding of seafarer training. That's to help the reform to happen. They cover reform of the curriculum, particularly around leadership and technological agility. I think we were surprised, I suppose, at the level of debate around the use of simulators that's still rumbling around the sector, and we need to get that resolved and understand how simulators and sea time work together in the most optimal way and time efficient way to create the right blend of experience. It feels like that debate needs to be closed out quickly. We thought about how to attract more people into the sector, felt strongly we needed to give students freer choice about where they studied. And we felt there's a real strength in continuing to provide a range of qualifications to cadets, but that there needed to be a shift towards qualifications that were based around honours degrees. To be clear, that's not saying all qualifications should be honours degrees. It's saying a significantly higher proportion of qualifications available should be honours degrees. We thought about improving the education system and felt that the colleges had to take greater accountability through the whole course, including the sea time for the students' development. The teaching standard we wanted to see improved, and linked to that, the license to operate for colleges really quite influenced by the quality of feedback from students. Wanted to see much more open competition between college, and this reflects very much on my own organisation as a regulator. We wanted to remove, as far as we were able within STCW constraints, any use of time spent as a criterion for judging the success of a particular part of education. That feels like a very, very old-fashioned way to judge outcomes. And we felt that sea time requirements had to be clearer and much more tightly enforced. We thought about the broader system and making change happen. I would recognise within the MCA that there's some significant change we need to make within the MCA in how we qualify colleges, test student capability, and ensure practical capability. The Commission also talked about change within the MNTB to make it more agile and forward thinking so that we could get ahead of the game. And finally, we talked about setting up a high-level project board just to make sure the changes and the recommendations stick. I think there was a very clear message from a number of people in the sector to say, we've sort of been here before and the changes just haven't happened. They have to happen this time. So in summary, those recommendations, I'm not going to go into any more detail. I thought I might start asking some of my fellow committee members to input now and give their perspectives. Mark, I wonder if you'd like to kick us off on this one.
Thanks, Brian, and I'm delighted to do so, and thank you for that clear overview and synopsis of the work of the Seafarer Cadet working group, which I was pleased to take part in with my fellow commissioners. Let me start from the top, if you like. This all stems from the government's strategy, Maritime 2050, which is a vision for the UK as a maritime nation, and critical and centre stage in that strategy, and critical for Nautilus as the union for maritime professionals in the UK and elsewhere. There is a section in that report, one of the 7 core elements is people in that strategy, is people. And the headline in people is growing our maritime skills. Why? Because maritime is really important to an island nation. It's really important in terms of contribution to economic activity and generating jobs not just at sea, but careers in shipping that often, at least historically and traditionally, have begun at sea. And after a period working in the industry, people have moved ashore and sustained that maritime, what we call our maritime cluster. So having a strategy is important. Having a strong people element is crucial. And having a vision for growing maritime skills is absolutely essential and really, really important for my union. So if we take that as the sort of the given in this, if we now look at what the Maritime Skills Commission Cadet Training Group and the Seafarer Cadet Review Report has highlighted, I just want to emphasize a number of areas that are important to me and to my union. First up, if you want to grow maritime skills in an industry that is global and in which competition, particularly around employment and the costs of employment are fundamental, then you need government commitment to provide the support, the investment. Now, historically, we have had, I think at the maximum we've had about 50%, but in recent times that's fallen back to 30%, and probably Catherine will probably be able to give us more precise estimates later when she comes in, but we're probably at about 35–40% the cost of training UK seafarers through cadetships. And that leaves us in a distinctly difficult situation in terms of the competition and the cost of training other nationals. So this report urges the government to fully fund 100% the cost of officer training. So that's really, really important in terms of fulfilling that ambition to grow our maritime skills base. We also know, incidentally, through work that's been done by Maritime UK and others, but Maritime UK more recently, that for every £1 of investment the government makes, there is a £3.80 return to the economy. So this is absolutely fundamentally, this is great value for the taxpayer, and it provides a great return to the UK economy. So that is the headline for me in delivering the people chapter of the Maritime Strategy 2050 is the government's support for that training. So I'm really pleased that the report firmly gets behind that. Secondly, I just want to emphasize the point that Brian made in his introduction. STCW has never been a desirable, it's not a goal just to reach the minimum. It is the minimum. And as a nation which has a proud history of providing highly qualified merchant Navy officers for service at sea and also ashore, overshooting that we've taken that for granted. But how you sustain that when everybody else is aiming for the minimum is really, really difficult. It comes back to costs again, and how you maintain a place in the industry, how you sustain that training when you have to make those investments and you're only getting a fraction of the support that others, and you have costs over and above others, is really, really problematic, which is why our maritime skills has been declining. It's why the tonnage tax has been so important in sustaining at least or slowing down the decline of UK officers. So having an aspiration and a desire and a determination that we will go above and beyond the minimum and sustain that through the third point I'd like to make, making sure that we have the skills. If you like, we're the first movers. We want to be the first movers in providing those critical leadership and management skills, cybersecurity skills, new technology, new fuels, all of the change that's coming over the next, well, it's upon us, but there are more changes coming, and the pace of change is so rapid. It would be absolutely, it's fundamentally important that we get on board with that, and we are amongst those first movers. We won't be the only ones discussing these types of strategies, but we need to get on with this, make the changes. As Brian said, my fourth point, there is a urgency about making these changes so that we can equip our people with the skills to be in demand in the industry. And that leads me to my next point, which is we have to make sure that the change happens. This can't be just another one of those reports that everybody says this is great, puts it on the shelf and stares at it as it gathers dust. This has to be, these recommendations need to be acted upon, and I'm pleased that there is a strategy outlined within the document to make sure that these changes are taken forward meaningfully, not only with government, but of course also within the industry. And the MNTB is mentioned as needing to fulfill, to support the change and make changes itself, and we're supportive of that. My final point, if I may, around the report itself, we need to attract. We need to maintain that multiple entry route into the industry, as the report is firm on. But equally, as Brian also emphasised, the need to just shift the centre of gravity, which is probably somewhere between HND and foundation degree, and just shift that more towards level 6 to the honours degree, because we believe that's what the industry wants, that's what the industry needs, and I think that's really important that we're behind that support, that see that as the direction. And I'm just going to contradict myself and say there's one other point I wanted to make. Brian, if you're chair, I'm used to calling out and referring to the chair. If I may, chair, just to abuse what I've got on the floor, we do need the feedback we get from our members is that the sea time experience needs to be improved. Now, it's not the case that everybody has a bad sea time experience. It's not the case that everybody has a bad experience at college either. But the report is very firm on the need to make sure that we do better in this regard. And I think that is a very strong feature of this report, which I strongly support. And incidentally, in the report from the working group, there is reference to a survey that Nautilus was pleased to help facilitate, and we also had session with some of the young, recently qualified officers who participated in that survey, and that was very, very illuminating and really important. And if any of the participants on the webinar today would like to see that report and read the detail of the feedback we got from them, then it is available on the Nautilus International website. But anybody who has problems accessing that, just let me know and I'll make sure you get a copy. I could go on, there's lots to say, and I'll hopefully have left some areas for other colleagues to talk about. And it is my pleasure now to hand over to Karen Waltham, who will go next, Brian.
Thank you, Mark. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks very much indeed, Brian, and thank you very much indeed for Mark's input as well. I would again endorse the comments that Brian's made in terms of highlighting what we've actually laid out, and I've been delighted to be part of not only the Commission, the wider Commission, but actually this subgroup, which we've put a lot of energy into and a lot of time and effort. I guess my experience, and for those who know me who don't, I'm an HR director with 30 years plus of people management experience. So what I wanted to be able to bring to this working group and to the Commission is the fact that working with people, that's what I do as a living. And 12 years within the maritime industry as a head of HR for a global organisation or within the global environment means that I understand the industry, I have a deeper understanding. And I think from absolute start point of this particular subgroup, that we worked at, when our terms of reference, if you like, really started from the fact that, you know, typically they were all around what I would regard as HR questions. And I think that the issues around anything that I would regard in the day-to-day business of workforce planning, so where are we going in the future, what do we need, skills and training needs analysis, thinking about what the sector needs, but also talent management. But it's about talent pipeline for me. It's about talent pipeline of people coming in, how we attract people into the industry, and cadets and seafaring cadets, etc., is actually pivotal to what we actually do. But that pipeline is also pivotal to that later on in their careers and actually the rest of the industry. And the industry is growing. People talk about shipping, people talk about maritime, but actually whether it be ports or logistics and everything we've actually taken into consideration there, it is all changing and changing at a rate. So I think in terms of the attraction and also the retention, as an HR director, we're always looking at where we pull people in, but how we look at our retention figures and etc. But some of the statistics that we had, which was really, really good, robust data, was that we really were losing a huge number of people at major stages of their training. Why? You know, let's look at that, and we did look at it, and it needs to change. Otherwise, we won't have things for the future. I specify as well, in terms of the work that I do, very, very heavily on whether it be leadership behaviours, people behaviours generally, competence. Competence, not necessarily within a maritime levels of competence, but competencies. So skills and soft behaviours. And all of that is all wound up right from the word go of someone's career. We're in a global market. And I think that a lot of the work that we've looked at is maritime, but also having the opportunity to look wider and look at the fact that we are look at other industries that we can make comparisons with. And I guess with my experience and having worked with people, we do say we're different. Maritime say we're different, but are we? And I would challenge, I would actually go back and people hear me say, actually maritime isn't different, because people management is the same. The industry is different, hugely different. And actually that is an attraction point that makes us very different. So I think sometimes it's about perhaps just majoring on slightly different things. And when we talk about change, it could be small changes. Some of it could be significant changes. And one of the other keys, I think, is change management. And we talk about that as a behaviour and a skill. And we've tried to feed that through within the subgroup, the work that we've looked at, how much change do we make? It would have been wrong of us to actually think about this work and not make any recommendations, because change is needed. But it's about thinking about how much change and how much can the sector take and how much can we cope with that. I think when it comes to the other thing we talked about a lot was how behaviours relate to things such as safety, diversity and inclusion, and all those different issues which are very, very key and at a very high level, but actually they're pivotal to the sector, but also key to other elements. Wellbeing as well came up, and Mark and Brian have already alluded to some of those within the recommendations and things that we have. So again, for me, it's people behaviours, but it's all tied up in everything else. I think in terms of the other the things that we looked at was that where we are global, we have got to bring ourselves back up to almost everyday life now. I think other sectors are ahead of us a long way. I can spend time saying we're 30 years behind. We are in some respects, but actually I'm talking about people management terms, and we have actually got to get that much more in line with that, and that starts from the cadets and how they're trained and how they're moving through. I suppose in summary for me, we had an invitation to look at and comment on the Seafarer Cadet training, and it was therefore key for us to be honest and fair in terms of what we wanted to do and the process we undertook and the recommendations that we made. As I say, we operate in a global market, so it was key for us to do that. So I think it was only fair for us to actually make sure that we did recommend some major changes. And I'm pleased, I'm really delighted to the changes that we've recommended. I think now it's up to us as an industry, and as Mark has alluded in terms of reference back, the whole of this goes back to what we want within the Maritime 2050 commitments, and it's now up to us to implement those changes, and that to me will be the key as well. So I think it's the implementation is down to all of us, and anybody who wants the industry to be retained is that's the key for me. So I've been absolutely delighted. I'm delighted with what we've got. More than happy to answer questions on people's side and be challenged, because I have happy to take the challenges as well. So thank you very much indeed. And what I'd like to do is pass over to Catherine, if that's okay, Brian. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon to everybody on the call. I think one of the most important things for me as the director of the Merchant Navy Training Board was to look at how we can pull in other sectors of our industry into this jigsaw, because all too often we're actually losing far too many of our qualified officers and young people when they feel that they can't go anywhere else other than leave the industry if they don't want to stay at sea. And I think what this did was this report highlighted a number of major issues on the recruitment side, why we were not attracting and retaining people, because it's about retaining the young people that we need to focus on. And I think for the MNTB, we're seeing an increase in dropout rates, and we want to know why. It's actually really worrying when you see on a year-on-year increase in the number of actual young students who are actually deciding that they don't want to stay in maritime after investing on average £50,000 per cadet for their training, which is a huge, huge amount of money. So I think one of some of the recommendations I think will go a long way to actually helping to retain those young students. A lot of students want a clear career path, and they want to have a proper qualification, not just a certificate of competency. They want to come out with a degree, and we've discussed this with many during the report review, but also from an MNTB perspective, we've talked to many young cadets who have also felt that there's just not enough for them qualification-wise to give them a competitive edge when they're competing in a global market, because after all, our young people are competing in a very wide market. So we have to, it's our responsibility to make sure that they're equipped with the right skills for that market. So that was the first really important step for me, is how do we then retain those young people? And I think some of the measures that we are making within this report will go a long way to retaining our students and giving them that flexibility and choice where they study, giving them the flexibility and choice of the type of exam and qualification that they come out with. Because at the moment, many of them don't have that choice. They're forced down a route that actually isn't beneficial to them, and it's not what they want. And then we wonder why they don't stay, they leave. So it's critically important that we give them that choice. And that's what I think this report will do. It's also given the industry the leverage to be able to make these changes, because they're long overdue. I mean, we haven't done this for years and years, 40, 50 years, and it's way out of date now. So I think this is a fantastic report. I've heard some incredible positive reviews. I've also heard some negatives, but mainly positive. And I think the first question that people ask me is, right, okay, now we've got the report. How do we implement it? Where do we go now? And I'm in a privileged position that I've got around my board table. I've got union representatives, I've got educationalists, and I've got shipping companies. And also I've got access to cadets. And it's having that user group and stakeholder engagement that will help us to build what we need for the future. And I'm really excited. I'm really excited. So I guess it's just one of those reports that gives the detail of every single thing we do. Will we achieve every recommendation? I hope we will. But there's a lot of work to do, and it's important that every single person in this industry contributes to that work. And that's where I'm going to be pulling in everybody in the user group that we set up to implement these recommendations. The MCA will be involved, the MNTB will be involved with all their stakeholders. So that's the group of people that will be doing the recommendations, implementing the recommendations. Thanks, Brian, back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Catherine. Sam, would you like to give your perspective? You come from quite a different background, and it'd be really interesting to hear it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I'm Sam McBriar. I do come from a slightly different background, and I've been really challenged and sort of motivated in working in this subgroup, learning a lot about this particular part of the maritime industry. The part of the industry I come from is maritime defence and engineering. I'm a strategy director at Thales. Thales is a design development company for a lot of maritime systems, with the Royal Navy as our main customer. So I've been in the maritime industry for about 20 years. I've got an engineering background, so I've been through that sort of STEM career quite a long time ago now, but not that long ago. Still remember a lot of it, a lot of the experience. And in my working life over the years, I've been involved in the modernisation of training, sort of working and supporting the Royal Navy in trying to make a step change in their training provision. You know, much of that is about the experience of the people, but it's also about the use of modern technologies to enhance that learning experience, to offer more efficiency, to help with pipelines, to help fill gaps. So when we talk about simulation, that's just one type of digital technology that can be used to help. As a strategy director now, sort of moving slightly outside of the engineering stream, I get to look at the future and look at the markets that we operate in. And, you know, what are the disruptions coming that mean we need to plan differently for skills and capability? So really, I'm bringing all of that experience into the Skills Commission and specifically into this subgroup for the report. So moving into the report then, the thing that struck me from the beginning as we started to hear the evidence was how open people were and how many common themes were being presented to us, quickly building into really a body of compelling evidence for change. And the iteration around those topics was really good. We worked really hard on that to test it. And for me, when we got the cadets in to talk to us, that was when it really landed in terms of, oh, well, okay, I can really hear from individuals that are experiencing this. And, you know, their expectations are not being set properly at the beginning, and they're also not being met during the totality of their experience. From the position in the company that I have, you know, we're in a globally competitive market for skills. You know, we're looking for these kind of STEM skills all the time in everything we do. So we have to compete for them by giving them a good experience and setting these expectations properly, giving them the choice, meeting those expectations. The other thing that the report did for me was it was very clear on two strands of disruption within the industry that are going to be really, really important for skills development and keeping these people in the industry. So we talk about decarbonisation, and we talk about the change in the human-machine interface really changing in the future. So as we see sort of increasing automation and digital technologies coming into our industry, this is really going to change what the working world is for our seafarers. It's going to change their jobs. It's going to change how they're required to lead in particular, because we're navigating through a big change in implementing these new technologies to deal with decarbonisation. So really, for me, we need to think about modern technologies, leadership development, and all of those things have come out really, really strongly in the report. And it's been really, really, really interesting to work on it and help to bring my experience to the group. So thank you. And I think I'm passing back to Brian.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was extremely, extremely clear. I wondered, probably posing this question to Karen initially, at least. We heard a lot from shipping employers we spoke to, and from people who've been through the cadet experience recently. Heard a lot that said we're not preparing them enough for leadership. For sort of leadership in the modern world, maybe not helping them with their own self-awareness and some of the softer skills. Karen, I wondered if you might take us through some of your thinking in that arena, please.
Yes, by all means, Brian. I think, and again, I've worked with organisations, companies, independently now who are who feel that captains who say we weren't prepared enough in the softer skills. I think it really boils down to behaviours and some behaviours. And sometimes we talk about what does leadership mean, and unpicking it a bit more. And I think if you take it down to a different level, it's things like decision making. It's about influence. It's about communication, team working. Some of those are the bigger ones are more known. It could be entrepreneurial insight or anything like that. But I think what we part of the work that we've been doing, and also that other sectors do, they recognise that soft skills, as we call them in HR, are different to technical skills. And I think people, there has been a tendency, and again, this is only by experience of where working within the industry and other people coming back and saying they don't necessarily understand what leadership is and what it might be like. Hierarchical, perhaps in the past, where it's been the command and control side, especially when people start coming ashore, going into pipeline, there's a different kind of leadership needed. So I'm picking it a little bit further. So when we've sort of gone down to different levels and testing different areas, the feedback we've had is that if only we'd had, I'm a captain that I can think of, well, lots, but one particular one said, if only I'd known this when I was a cadet. And that was actually a phrase that was literally feedback. And it was one of those that said, well, in what way? Things like decision making, things like communication, but communication, unpicking communication. How do people communicate in different ways, as opposed to being told so much of how to do things. So I think it's exploring it differently. And funny enough, there was a question in the chat, I think from someone. It relates to that. I was saying, why are we different to other industries? We're behind other industries, and I think other industries do start looking at what leadership in particular, or any other sort of work within people are. Why is it different? Why are they ahead? Because they do focus further down the funnel, if you like, of skills and attributes and competencies, and don't just what I believe and other people have said in the past has been perhaps all encompassing in leadership. So I suppose I unpick it an awful lot more, and I think that those are the things that people are relishing, and certainly people are enjoying the difference and feeling that difference when they understand it more. Interestingly though, a really big issue I know I've hit on a number of occasions working within very large well-known organisations, where perhaps people use technical trainers for soft skill development. And the type of trainers and the type of perhaps skill set required to do that, two different types of jobs, as in skills of trainers. So when you teach people technical skills, it's a different skill set to teaching people behaviours. And I think that's something we need as an industry to have a look at, and be careful we don't do behaviour training with skills experts and mixing the two. And the points that Sam made are very relevant. There's so much more technology now that we can use and make use of, and I think we can do more of that. So it's a massive topic. And yeah, funny enough, we're now moving into a skills and behaviours forum, etc., or working party that I'm chairing anyway. So hopefully we can take that further and unpick that further for everything else. But does that start to unpick a little bit more of the question, Brian?
That's really helpful, Karen, and I think it builds on Sam's earlier comment that there were a number of very, very strong common themes emerging, and this was actually one of them that we heard consistently. Catherine, I wonder if we might just pick your brains for a bit. The implementation of this is going to be challenging, and I feel that Mark alluded to the same things. Have you any thoughts around how we might, as a sector, just make sure that implementation really happens, what the barriers to that might be?
Thank you, Brian. I don't believe actually there's going to be any barriers per se, but I think that we have to be very structured in our approach because of the fact and the size of the job that we would have to do, we have to carry out. I think we have to be extremely organised. And I think one of the first things, and I've been talking to my group of stakeholders quite recently about this, I think one of the most important factors initially is to understand the regulatory requirements for cadet training. I think that's the biggest thing. We all know how long it takes for STCW to be implemented and changed. I think we have to get away from that whole idea that we're going to be hindered by STCW. I think we can interpret STCW and change the way that's interpreted. Absolutely we can. But I really don't think we should be saying, oh, God, we can't do anything because STCW says this, that, and the other. This is, remember, a basic standard. And I think we have to be working around that. So that would be my first suggestion to the group that we put together with the MCA, that the first challenge is to look at STCW requirements and what can we change and interpret within that. And then I think once we've done that, that then forms the base. But I think also what we need to remember is we have some incredibly great training programs out there already. So what do we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to look at what we have at the moment and see what we need to make increase, what we need to add. But there's very little room in the cadet training program at the moment. So it's key that we free up some space to allow us to be able to put in the most important things that the shipping companies want, that the cadets feel that they need. There's a number of things. So that would be my first thing. STCW, look at the interpretation of STCW as it stands now without changing anything. And let's see how that currently fits into what we have with the courses that we're currently delivering. And that would be the first challenge.
Thanks very much, Catherine. I was intrigued, Sam, with some of your comments, and as you described your own sort of experiences and how you've got to do what you're doing. As you look at sectors you've been involved in and have seen operate, are there pieces of learning that we should be taking from some of the other sectors that you've seen, who you feel do this really well?
Yeah, I think, close to home in the maritime environment, we should be looking into the Royal Navy in terms of what they've discovered about their training provision, some of the change programs that they've put in to try and take things forward for what they need in the future. And we're fortunate that we do have Second Sea Lord on the Maritime Skills Commission, and is championing a cross-sector approach to skills. So I think that's really going to help us. If we look outside maritime, commercial aerospace, I would say, is already there in terms of simulator training. It's kind of just expected that will be part of how we learn. And it's allowed the release of high value assets to be used for things that are more valuable that they need to do. And the Navy's the same, actually. They use digital technologies to allow them to release their warships, their submarines, their helicopters to go and do the things they need to do. So there's plenty to learn from. And another member of our team, Lucy Armstrong's got a lot of cross-industry experience. So we brought her nursing training, police training, all sorts of things that we've talked about in terms of these are places we can go and look.
That's brilliant, Sam. Thank you. Really helpful. I see Graham Baldwin's joined us. Welcome, Graham. And I'm just going to hand the reins over to you, Graham, for the questions and the question time part of the session. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon, everybody. And my apologies for being a little bit late onto this call. I just wanted to start by saying thank you to the panel, all of you, for not only your presentation this morning, but more importantly, I think, for the considerable amount of time and effort that you've put in terms of undertaking the review and coming up with what is, I think, an excellent report. Clearly, this is a very challenging area, but a really, really important piece of work, and one that I'm sure will be very much appreciated. This is very significant for the Maritime Skills Commission. I think everybody will be aware of that. It's just about 1 year now since we received our tasking letter from the Shipping Minister. I think colleagues are aware of the remit of the Maritime Skills Commission with regard to understanding skills needs, ensuring there aren't any gaps, ensuring the qualifications that are required are available, ensuring that we've got adequate training provision, ensuring a pipeline of workforce, new recruits with the appropriate expertise, and also looking to increase exports. But in the tasking letter, there was a specific request made on us to look at smart funding. And we considered that as a commission, but recognized that actually we needed to take a far more strategic approach, really, to considering officer cadet education in a more holistic way, particularly accounting for the significant changes that are going to face seafaring in the coming year, which I know will have been articulated by my colleagues. So that's what led to a considerable amount of work being done, which is very much appreciated. We recognise as a commission that there is a lot more work to be done, clearly, and this is just the start in terms of this review, but it does provide a very, very helpful framework from which we will be able to progress. And just for information, again, probably people will be aware, but the report has been submitted to the Minister, and we're delighted that he's approved that. And we look forward very much as a commission to moving forward and making very significant further progress. So that's where we are. And I'm delighted to be able to join this today and to move into the question and answers. And we've got those. So I'll invite colleagues on the panel to respond to these. So we've got one straight up from Darryl Bate, report highlighting a lot of feedback about the quality of teaching and learning. Would the panel welcome seafarer training coming under the scope of Ofsted inspection? This will bring it into line with other vocational educational training. That's a particularly interesting one. I don't know if anybody would want to start with that, but I'm thinking, Catherine, that may be sort of something you want to pick up.
Yes, thank you, Graham, and Darryl, for your question. I think that the training establishments are already audited to death, and I think if you put any further audits on them, I think that they would probably be horrified. You know, I work very closely with the educationalists, and the number of external audits that they go through for quality, not just for their own industry and their own universities or colleges. You know, they're very strict, the quality process, procedure, monitoring, etc. But to put them through yet another, and when actually the Ofsted report would probably be very similar to the things that they already have in place for auditing. So I wouldn't think it's necessary, if you want my honest opinion, Darryl.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Does anybody else want to comment on that one, colleagues on the panel?
Maybe I could come in, Graham. I think it's a really good question, and you know, obviously, I've sort of an interest in this because I run the MCA who do regulate this. It's really clear to me that we need to significantly change how the colleges are regulated. I'm not particularly precious as to sort of where that happens from. I do agree with Catherine's point. I think it needs to be without adding more volume of audit. But I think what we can do within the MCA, what we need to do is make sure we're auditing against the right criteria. I think we said in the report we really wanted to get more into the feedback from students and understand what the feedback from students was. And I think in some cases we want to be a little bit more clear about exactly what the outcomes are that we're expecting from the colleges. So I sort of see the report as an opportunity to rethink all of that with the sector, with the MNTB, whether at the end of that the MTA is the right place for that to sit. I guess we'll see. I sort of suspect it is, but I wouldn't completely shut it down. But probably, I know we've got significant job to do just to make that change within the MCA, but I think we're well on with that now. Yeah,
thank you, Brian. Just conscious of time and the questions, so if we move on fairly quickly. Got a question from Sarah, just saying, following on from a question from Dieter, if we move to a model where cadets are picked up from within their courses rather than being sponsored from the beginning, how do we envisage that working? Mark, do you have a view on that?
Sorry, I just trouble on meeting there. Well, not really, not being my area of specialism, but what I would say, and I'll try and address it this way, because there have been a number of questions on the chat and now also in the Q&A, which are desperate for the detail. And I just want to pick up what you said, Graham. We don't have all the answers, and this is the start, not the end of the process. We've made some recommendations, and those recommendations need to be worked through. And many of the areas in which the report addresses, there will be consultation. There will be, this isn't the, we haven't got the power to just implement these next week or over the next couple of years. This is our assessment, having taken all the evidence. And the key thing is, Graham, what's happening now is not good enough. And so we can do one of two things. We can do nothing, and the only guarantee then you have is continuation of too many students, too many cadets, too many of my members having a bad experience. The country doesn't get the maritime skills and the people it needs for the future. And my members don't have any career prospects because their skills rapidly fall behind the pace of change that the industry is demanding. So to all those demanding to know this and that, and how many bolts, how many widgets, and how much it's going to cost, I don't know. I don't know, but it's got to change. That's all I'll say to you. It has to change. I mistakenly answered a question in the Q&A. I better give the answer now because I didn't get to type it in. I pressed the wrong button. Somebody asked, how much is this all going to cost if we're going to give 100% funding? Let me just say this. What I know, what the government currently provides for smart funding is 15 million. And that's, well, 40%. Let's say it's 50% because I'm not very good at maths. It's 50% of the costs. So we want 100%. So there you go, 30 million. But we want to grow the number of people coming through. So it's going to be north of 30 million. And somebody else asked, is the government up for it? I believe the government is up for it, but that's Brian's job. That's Graham's job. So I want you to get on with that. I want you to go and get that money from the government. We want north 30 million at least, because that's the investment we need to make. And we know that that's going to deliver maybe 4 times that into the economy. Let's all get behind the report because that's the positiveness. There's lots of questions. Don't know the answers.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think you're right in terms of there's a lot of detail that we still need to get into. Dieter's put a question in the chat there, and sorry, Dieter, I didn't see some of the earlier questions having come in late, but I think you're talking about who will fund the sea time, travel and cadet incidental travel costs, and hopefully Mark has just addressed that. Got a question coming in from Claire with regard to, and again, Mark, you might start on this, and then other colleagues come in behind you. But the issue of cadets who have been through training who then can't get a job, and she's asking which sectors are so low on numbers and why aren't they taking on these fully qualified officers? Smart's tried to address this, but it only affects a few of those struggling. Mark, do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah. And then we'll go wider.
Smart Plus tried to introduce a voluntary employment link by offering the carrot of a bit more money to those companies that are prepared to give 12 months sea time to cadets recently qualified. I think our goal of basically getting more money to throw into the pot so that we raise the sort of average, the percentage of support to the industry to train cadets was the right approach. I think we ended up with something that was, complex, more complex than it perhaps ought to have been. But, there is obviously accountability that comes with government support, and there has to be clarity. I think we've lost our way there. Certainly, also COVID hasn't helped in the last couple of years. So numbers have declined. It hasn't achieved its goal. So, you know, it's not doing what we set out to do, but the intentions behind it were strong and good. And we don't want to lose sight of that as we move forward into this new era based on these recommendations. Now, I think you've got to look at the report in the whole. If we provide the full funding, if we provide our people with the skills that the industry needs and they future-proof those skills, then in that round, in the holistic sense, we will improve, I passionately believe we will improve the employment prospects of our cadets. Now, I think the report identifies, don't quote me specifically, but it's certainly north of 50%, maybe 60% had found employment within 6 to 12 months of their qualification. That is not as bad as I thought it was. I think there's some positive there. The dropout rate throughout the cadetship is too high. Everybody acknowledges that. I haven't met anybody in the industry, whatever side you're on or in this debate, have ever said that's acceptable. So we need to address that, and the report does address those areas and try and make it to the absolute maximum we possibly can, that everybody has a positive experience. The dropout rate is suppressed, and we improve the employment, and we hold those companies who have entered the tonnage tax to account for their delivery of their core training commitment, their obligations to train UK seafarers. And through, the report is clear on this on page 23. I've read it several times this morning about their obligations under the tonnage tax being codified better, monitored, and make sure that they deliver. Now, in the round, therefore, my expectation is that there will be a better experience at sea, at college, and securing employment globally. This is a global industry, so we shouldn't just look at sectors in the UK. I'm not suggesting the question was doing that, but I'm saying let's look at this as our place, global Britain, build back better, build back fairer. Let's get our people working internationally with those skills in demand, even though they have higher employment costs.
Great, thank you, Mark, very helpful indeed. And I think that you've also, in an earlier answer, answered Rory's question about the government paying for that training. And I think I remember you passing the buck on to myself and Brian. So we'll pick up on that outside. Thank you for that. Karen, there's a specific question coming around HR and from the sort of people bit around your presentation. I think you said that there are other sectors that are ahead of maritime, and the question is really, in your opinion, what are those sectors, and how are they ahead of maritime, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I think the point I was trying to make is that I think in people management terms, HR terms, we are immature in HR. And the number of people, funny enough, I mean, connected to work I've done in the past, the number of HR practitioners within maritime is far smaller than other industries. Industry specific, anything from the retail, the banking, IT, legal side. I mean, there's lots. Aircraft industries or aviation, etc., railways. There's those kind of things we can learn from others. And I think that when you talk to people like some of the big employers, like say within our sector, BP and Shell, for example, I've named those two. There's many others, but funnily enough, shipping is quite small within their business. They might not think it BP shipping or anything else, but actually they benefit from the fact that because they're in other industries, the level of HR and the maturity of anything they do is encompassed in the whole of their business. And actually, the shipping areas benefit from everything else that they do within people management terms. Those organisations that are pure maritime or pure shipping or are smaller within the sector have less maturity about how to manage people, and that's not. It's not condescending or anything. It's purely what they don't know. And I think it's about educating the sector and people within the industry more in people management terms. So I've been at conferences and asked how many people have, done workforce plans, 5 or 10 or how many years ahead, and within a group of 200 people, I had 15 hands that were put up, and that was from CEOs and HR and heads of HR managers. So it's things like that, and think about planning. So I think it's getting better. The improvements I've seen over the last 10 years have been huge, but it could be far better. And I think that when we start looking at some of the bigger groups, it's just working with people to actually encourage them to do more with their people management and expand that. So I wouldn't actually say certain sectors. I just think that we as a sector are slightly behind, and I'd probably reference more on the the HR level of maturity. So anything around planning and talent management, etc. That would be hopefully my comment. I hope that helps.
Yes, thanks, Karen. Very helpful. Brian, there's a couple of questions come in around the extent of the consultation, both to date and in the future. I think you wanted to pick up on those.
I think it is worth just picking up on those, because I think a couple of points, and Mark I think has already touched in very clearly on one of the points, which is this report was only ever intended to look at the overview, and there's a massive amount of detail to work underneath. And I think there are a lot of different stakeholders around the sector that will need to be involved in working out the implementation and discussing the conclusions of the report. There is a bit of a but here, though. I do think the sector needs to look at itself in the mirror and ask itself why so little change has happened over the last 20 to 30 years and why it's so far behind. So I'm sort of signalling here that yes, in my head at least, people will be very engaged in this, and there's a lot to work out together. But I think collectively, we do need to drive this at some pace. I think we're very clearly at a crossroads in the UK where we either preside over continuing decline of the maritime sector or make interventions like this and deliver change and re-kickstart the maritime sector again. I think you've heard flavours of that from the other panellists who are involved in the report. So yes, absolutely to the question, people will be very engaged in this, but what we mustn't do together is implement something that is slow and doesn't keep pace with the change that we require to deliver, or water things down to the extent that it all still feels the same in 2-3 years' time. Yeah,
thank you, Brian. We're conscious of time and questions coming in thick and fast, so thank you everybody for that. Question from Peter Aylett about the difference in terms of the environment between the Royal and Merchant Navies and the cross skills needed to consider the differences. Has the evidence collection, colleagues, do we think, been broad enough, and will industry be consulted widely? I guess, Brian, you've touched on that to some extent in your answer, but I wonder if Catherine or Sam would want to add something to that.
Graham, yes, I'd like to just say that the whole review of cadet training and the implementation of the recommendations, we have to engage industry. They are the end users, and they are the ones that are going to be employing our cadets. Why have we done this? Because we want our cadets to get a job at the end of it. Simple. We want them to be employed at the end of their training. And if we don't engage with our industry partners, as in the shipping companies that are going to be doing this, even law firms, class societies, all these people have a vested interest in what happens to our cadets. And it's about opening that big door and having all sectors have that input. And that's what we will be doing with this cadet training program review. We will be sitting down with these people and we will be consulting them at every step of the way, because without that, what's the point? There is no point.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think Catherine, sorry, absolutely agree with that. The consultation vitally important. Sam, yes, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to add on the difference between the Merchant Navy and the Royal Navy. Yes, for sure, there are differences there in terms of the way the system works, the types of ships, the environments that these people are put in. But I think where we're starting from is what are the areas of commonality? what are the similar challenges we face, and they're facing exactly the same challenges in terms of decarbonisation, human-machine interface changes, the expectations of people of their learning experience. And certainly the Royal Navy is not exempt from any of that. So I think there is definitely a lot to learn from them.
Yeah, no, thank you. That crossover really important, isn't it? And that leads on to the skills piece again, Karen. There's a couple of questions in around the softer skills, and Gillian Ferguson asking whether it would be worthwhile perhaps now implementing the sort of emotional intelligence and self-awareness elements as compulsory on the chief mates stage of the programme. Your thoughts on that, and perhaps, you know, that softer skills bridging the gap with the more technical stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for the question, because I think it is relevant, and I think these are the kind of things we're getting down to in a lower level, if you like, because to the point that we were just talking about the Royal Navy and the MN as well, that at the end of the day, people are people. And whether it's Royal or Merchant Navy, that was one thing I was going to add. But when it comes to the other softer skills and behaviours, that's where I think perhaps other sectors or other areas are starting to talk about that kind of language, and we've got to include it. So by unpicking, and that's why we've set up the new subgroup, which is looking at skills and behaviours. Skills and technical skills are different to behaviours, and technical skills can be learnt, and actual behaviours, you know, are taught in a different way. So, but new, yes, entrepreneurial insight and awareness, anything and elements like that, I do think absolutely need to come out. We also need to think about where the technology, Sam's already highlighted the type of technology we're looking at for the future. Different types of skills will be needed, and by doing that gap analysis, looking where we're going to, we've got to start, looking at already. And other sectors, Catherine mentioned already, we are looking at other sectors because people have started that kind of work. What can we learn from them? What have they got? Where are the links? Where's the overlaps? So again, we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We're looking to build on others as well. But yeah, it's highlighting perhaps what we aren't looking at the moment and where we're missing, so that we don't lose out.
Thank you, Karen. I think that picks up on a number of questions that are in the Q&A there around the skills piece and the Royal Navy, Merchant Navy differences that have been picked up as well. An interesting question from Kevin Slade. And I know, Kevin, you've been working in this area for some time. You know, about the available sea time is mentioned in the report, and potential bottleneck, and asking whether more berths can be found in a declining fleet, or indeed whether we should go towards purpose-built cadetships, which is an interesting question. I don't think one that we've necessarily considered in detail at this stage, but I don't know, Catherine, Mark, do you have a view on that? Sorry, Catherine or Mark?
Do you want to go first, Mark?
I'm going to defer to you guys. I'm busy furiously typing answers on various questions and missed the question. So,
you know, I think, Graham, in an ideal world, we would have cadet training ships, you know, for every port in the UK if we had a lot of money. Fact is, we haven't got money. We need money for this type of thing, because I do hugely believe that this would, had we had individual training ships, say 10, 15 training ships in the UK, our problem that we have at the moment with struggling to get berths for our cadets, particularly under this COVID challenge, would have not existed. And I think, you know, in an ideal world, that's what we want. We want training ships where we can do onboard training, where we can put cadets on for 3 to 4 months at a time without worrying about, you know, oh, they've only got 1 month sea time and they've got, you know, another 11 to find. This is the challenge here and now. So I think this is great, but how are we going to do it? Because it's about money, and you're talking about a lot of money. So, you know, if we can piggyback on the back of an existing scheme, you know, and maybe, you know, encourage companies to open up their doors to, you know, training cadets, more cadets. But I just don't see it happening at the moment unless we have a huge investment in that side of our training.
Yeah.
Sorry to be negative, but it's a fact.
No, and of course, there are these resource limitations, aren't there, Catherine? So
Yeah.
and you know, need to work out somewhere. There's a Rolls-Royce solution, but then there are other solutions along the way, aren't there? So thank you for that. Just conscious of the final few questions that are in the chat at the moment. Brady Hogg talking about the Royal Navy and does agree that the education and training is of a high standard, aligned to the operational requirements, and how we can overcome the barrier between the Royal Navy and the Merchant Navy. Hopefully that's been partly addressed by Sam. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Sam, at this stage?
Only that we need to acknowledge it's a different funding system. And we've talked about the funding system needing to change. So hopefully that kind of incentive will help address some of that and balance it off.
And I guess a part of this review and the recommendations is about identifying the challenges that need to be addressed and then working out how we actually deal with that. And you're right, beginning to start the discussion, the conversation, and look at how we address some of these barriers. And different funding is, of course, a classic. That, I suppose, leads in nicely. Oh, sorry, Karen.
Well, no, I was just going to add, actually, Graham, that I think that in the past there is a difference. I think there is a difference, but I think that's where we would challenge, you know, let's look at opportunities that we can actually build on those. So it's kind of like not looking at the difference, trying to turn everything into a positive. So let's look at where there is some duplication, where there's other things we can learn from each other to help. So not looking at it as a difference, trying to eradicate that and turning everything into a positive.
Yeah, but yeah, couldn't agree more. And Catherine and Mark also want to comment on this.
Yeah, I was actually just going to come back to the question from Kevin. That was one of the questions I was furiously trying to answer, Graham. So apologies, but I think that the issue of berths, you know, we need to create this kind of virtuous circle. We get more berths because we've got more companies who see the opportunity, see the support and train for their own needs. But equally, we've also got companies who are seeing the UK as a place they want to do business, the tonnage tax being one of the ways in which they can do that. Hopefully they'll base their operations here, bring their ships here, flag their ships here, train more UK people. So it becomes a kind of, you know, self-fulfilling prophecy. And I know I'm going to pitch in with something quite controversial, if I may, Graham, but all this debate about the new royal yacht, I mean, I despair, you know, I mean, we should be seeing how we can spend 200 million on a couple of UK training ships manned by merchant seafarers. Again, apologies if that's controversial. You know, training ship, yes, but also that sort of diplomatic and foreign office outreach and that business, creating that business outreach as well to export markets, import markets, whatever. But from a merchant perspective, with the training as the function, and I know Kevin's very passionate about that in his own right, and I should declare a conflict of interest because I'm involved in some work with Kevin around a project to deliver that kind of vessel. So, you know, that's what we should be using that 200 million for, not building I think somebody called it a oligarch's yacht, but I'll leave others to comment on that. Thanks, Graham, and apologies for abusing your opportunity to come in there.
Not at all, Mark. Thank you very much. Catherine?
Yes, thanks, Graham. I think one of the major urgent issues that we are going to be addressing within the Maritime Skills Commission and the group that we form to take forward these recommendations is the sea time and the quality differences in sea time. I mean, they can vary so much from cadet to cadet, you know, company to company, even internally they can vary. And, you know, it's ridiculous how many people leave the industry after their first time at sea. So this is something that's absolutely key in my mind that we should be addressing instantly. And I know that the MCA are looking at ways in which to be able to monitor and measure and regulate that sea time. And it's a very big challenge, but it is something that's really, really important. So that is going to be very high on the agenda. So not just sea time berths, but actually sea time quality.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm acutely aware of time, colleagues. I know that some people have already had to drop off the chat and beginning to go. And so begin to pull this to a conclusion. There is one question there that I think is very relevant. Will there be a roadmap or an implementation plan clarifying how these recommendations would be implemented? And it would be useful to know how all stakeholders can be involved. I think probably one of the things we would want to emphasize is the as has already been said in some of the previous answers, that we see consultation and stakeholder engagement being very important across actually all of the work of the Commission. And we've got an evidence session on Friday of this week where we're looking at the whole area of green skills and things, and invited people to come and share their thoughts and views. So that's a policy, so we will do that. The roadmap or implementation plan, we need to move towards that clearly, and you'll have seen that one of the recommendations is about a group that will oversee the implementation of these recommendations, and we do consider that to be vitally important. You know, we don't want this to become a report that sits on the desk and becomes dusty. This is something that's a living document, a dynamic that we want to address and work with colleagues across the sector to implement. So hopefully that answers that question. But I think just noting time, we're due to finish at 12:45. What I would like to do is say, you know, thank you very much once again to everybody for attending this morning. It's a lively debate. It's a really interesting one. We would very much like to continue this. There will be opportunities to listen again, though, and also for anybody who's missed it, this session has been recorded. It will be available on the Maritime Skills Commission website, and we will commit to keeping stakeholders further updated, so please do follow that. And the final thanks is once again to our panelists who are members of the review group and who've done, I think, a fantastic job, and their contribution on top of the day job has been much appreciated, and I think you'll agree it's a really interesting piece of work. So colleagues, thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to speaking to everybody again soon with further updates from the Maritime Skills Commission. Thank you.